Hi, my name is Markian Tarasiuk. I'm the director of the movie Hunting Matthew Nichols.
Matthew, I want you to know that there's a lot of people who care for you and are looking for you.
It's about two missing boys, Matthew Nichols and Jordan Reimer, who went missing on Vancouver Island 23 years ago. And now Matthew's sister, Tara, is opening up at the case, which has gone cold for 23 years, to find answers about where her brother is. And it goes a little crazy.
What drew you to create a film set on Vancouver Island, and particularly northern Vancouver Island?
When I first moved out, growing up on the prairies, when I first moved out to Vancouver, there was a sense of like absolute foreign quality to it of me, because the prairies versus the Pacific Northwest, very, very different, landscape typography. And I think anybody, it's not just me, it's like when I talk about the forests of the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Vancouver, they seem very, very spiritual. They feel like when you go into those forests, the heaviness, the darkness, the expanse of it all, how old those trees are, when we talk about old growth forests, there's a haunting quality to them. And so that was the first thing I clocked when I moved to Vancouver, was kind of this ancient feeling that I never had growing up in terms of my experience on the flat prairie wheat fields, that I was taken aback by and that were so interesting to me. And I love going hiking in those forests, but at the same time, I would not want to be caught dead at night in those forests. No way. So when we were developing Hunting Matthew Nichols, I think the landscape, and Sean also lived in Vancouver. Sean Oliver, our writer, he lived in Vancouver for years. He's down in LA now. That was something we agreed on right away, was wanting to put this onto, Vancouver Island specifically, because when you go over there, there's a sense, and we actually have a deleted scene in the movie where we talk about the feeling of when you go to an island, you are trapped. And it plays a trick on the mind, I think subconsciously. When you go over to Vancouver Island, there's kind of no escape, and you are there and you're not going anywhere. You are now in the control of the ferry system, and somebody else is in charge of your destiny. So you're out of control, right? So it's like there's all these things subconsciously, I think, that we went for, and hopefully has that effect on our audience when you watch this movie. The gray skies, the old forests, the fact that it's an island, I think puts you in a headspace that is ripe for horror.
And it's funny that you mention, old growth forests and all of that, because Canada, compared to other countries like in Europe, is so young. But not these forests, and not the places that you explored within the film. Those are old, and one way you kind of demonstrate that is through myths, and in the film you talk about various myths. What was the research like going into that, and were you always like into these myths? And you talked about the Wendigo and all that, and
yeah. I knew it was something that I wanted to make a part of our story, especially from like a documentary angle, where documentaries do this all the time. When you talk about like, if there's some kind of theory that the documentary is connected to, they usually dramatize it in this way of talking about, there's all these stories that other people have theories about this and that, and there's always that section. So from like a narrative perspective, that's why I wanted to include it, because I feel like it's a very cliched thing to do. And I think in this film, cliches are not bad, because I am picking on your comfort as an audience member, as if you've seen this thing before. And I want you to get a little too comfortable within my format that I'm presenting to you as a filmmaker. But all that being said, I think, yeah, like Sean did a lot of research about the myths around the world, and there seems to be this theme that there is forest spirits all around the world that exist, that are quite popular in cultures all around the world. And they all have similar stories, and this has been thousands of years that these stories, and our anthropologist in the film talks about how these stories are created to keep kids out of the woods, because back in the village days they didn't want kids running away, so they made them scared of the woods, right? So that's, I think, the anthropology on why those all exist. And the famous one being Canada, which is the Wendigo, which is in Ontario, is kind of our most famous myth. I also added the Baba Yaga because I'm Ukrainian, and that's the one I grew up with, was the tales of Baba Yaga, being told to me as a kid. And then just to kind of cap off this conversation of like this myth, I remember when I was talking to Sean about this, of like, who is Roy McKenzie? What does he mean? And like, how do we talk about him? Is when I was at Ukrainian camp growing up, at a rival camp, so it wasn't our campus specifically, there was this old abandoned cabin there, and the myth was that there's a guy named Crazy Pete who lives in that cabin, who has a rusty knife that if you go into the forests at night, he will stab your stomach with this rusty knife. And I was fucking terrified of it. I was 7 or 8 years old, terrified of this fictional character, Crazy Pete. And that was it. Like that's as complicated as that lore got, but it scared the shit out of me. And so I was talking to Sean about this to be like, that's who Roy McKenzie is. It's like, it's that simple, that it's something that around the kids that's spread, and that is everybody locally seems to have. So in Gimli, Manitoba, we had Crazy Pete. I think you can just swap that out anywhere you go in the world.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because most myths are tied to some religion or culture. I guess like atheists probably have just stories like Crazy Pete or in the film, Rory, where you're like, I heard about this guy who went and lived as an ascetic in the woods and he never came back. And the myths like that and storytelling in general kind of traverse all faith and belief. Which is kind of like the journey that the characters go on in the film, right? Like they go from pretty earnest intentions with it, and you kind of juxtapose that at the end where it goes back to that first interview with your lead character, and it's just like she starts earnestly, and then it slowly devolves, much like a horror film in general, right?
Correct. I mean, and it's like we stayed in the beginning of the movie. The thesis of what's about to happen is stated by Tara within the first 20 seconds of the film. And we made that really, really on purpose, because it states where we're about to go. And if you're tuned in to what you know is about to happen, it's a very fun sentence. And if you don't know where it's going to go, it probably glosses over your head a little bit right at the beginning. But you're right. It's this idea and this notion of, and we've seen this play out, all the time, of like, how far do you go into the conspiracy? How far are you willing to believe something that is so unbelievable? That's Tara's journey, because she's searching for answers and has this nagging feeling in her. And, gosh, we've seen it play out with COVID conspiracies. We've seen it play out with government conspiracies. People really, you can witness, are losing their minds. And that's, again, what the journey was always for Tara, was it was always going to be losing her mind. If you put too much stock into something that is unbelievable, it's going to inevitably end up in disaster for me. So it's like a bit of like the movie, as well as being just a fun narrative and a horror narrative. To me, it is allegory for the dangers of when you go down and believe something too unbelievable, you destroy yourself. And you've seen people get destroyed with relationships during the COVID stuff, the anti-vaxxing. Like, you saw these things get destroyed. And so that's what also that this is what the movie is about for me at the end of the day, if you want to like break it down past its just like horror veneer.
So for people who are watching the film and may or may not know where this is, where did you shoot the film, and why did you choose this location particularly?
So we shot the film in a couple places, Vancouver, obviously. But then we went up to, and the town is based around Port Hardy on the island. So our town in the movie is called Port Rupert, which is a mixture of a bunch of places, and we made that very purposefully because it plays a trick on the audience that whenever I've mentioned Port Rupert, people think they've been there or they've heard about it, but they're actually thinking of Prince Rupert, Port Hardy, or Fort Rupert. And so we made that very, very specific, and we put it at the northern end of the island. So Port Hardy is the last town basically on the most northern part of Vancouver Island. And we put it up there because it's so, again, foreign. It's way out there. Look, we went and shot out there. Hey, great community. I'm not going to disparage Port Hardy, but it's a weird place, okay? It is a weird place because I think of its foreign nature. It's so far away from kind of like larger cities. Inevitably, when you're in that rural of a location, it's just, there's weird vibes. And, that's what also we wanted to have in our movie. And we felt it was important to go shoot up there. So we actually have that authenticity within the film. And authenticity was my number one rule throughout this entire process, was everything had to be authentic. And that comes through in the film, and I wanted it up there because it's just such a specific place. And we toyed with this whole notion too back in early development that we were gonna, and we kind of get into it, that when people go missing in that foreign of a place, it's not really talked about in the media, which is also true. People, when they go missing in a big city, especially two boys, would be a huge story. But somewhere like Port Hardy, it would make a little splash in Victoria maybe, but I don't think it would really make it off the island in terms of a story. So we wanted to play with that notion of like, oh, this case just didn't get the attention it deserved back in 2001, partly because of the location. So that was also a narrative decision. Yeah.
And that leads really well into my next question, which is, there's been a lot of unease on Vancouver Island lately. There's been like some online speculation about a potential serial killer like in the area that you were kind of filming. And there's a pretty large history of missing people on Vancouver Island, just writ large. Was this history something you were aware of when you started the project, or did you come to learn it?
It was something that we came to learn. I don't think it was really on my radar when we began this whole journey that like specifically, so we chose Vancouver Island for the reasons that I stated earlier on the podcast, which was, the location and the haunting forest and stuff like that. But we came to learn that this stuff that what you just said, that there's like these clusters of missing people. And like, look, folks, no one's really looking into it. And yes, you are right in saying that there are some rumors about serial killers look, stuff on TikTok has been made about this, that the profiles of a lot of these missing people are the same. So inevitably you start making connections with serial killers. I just think that on top of that, maybe, I don't mean to scare anybody listening to this, that there are serial killers, but Vancouver Island, again, too, is something where you can get lost so easily. And I'm not saying like that it's like people getting lost, or maybe I am. I just think it's somewhere that if you want to go disappear, you can do it easily, like really easily on Vancouver Island. So I think that kind of plays into it a little bit. But the cluster is a weird thing that, again, we've just found out about this year, that I think, I don't mean to prey upon it on my movie, but am I mad that that's a fact and like we made this movie and it's kind of these two things are intersecting together? No. And maybe that if it gets people to talk about actual missing people on Vancouver Island, that could be a positive that comes from this movie. and also look into the weird. Hey, there are weird communities in Vancouver Island. Like, you can go on Google Maps and see some weird stuff that people have gone on Reddit and that I've looked at. All the stuff that we talk about in our movie is, like, to me, in the realm of possibility.
When you think of Vancouver Island, you know, as I'm from Edmonton, I thought about it and was like beaches, surfing. You know, I have this very stereotypical postcard image of it.
Yeah.
But then when you come to live here, you understand that, and yeah, you go to places up north, and you're like, wow, this is gorgeous. But there's this unease where you're like, who's here? What's going on? Why do people stay here? All of that. You know, this podcast, I guess, aims to explore a deeper, less touristy perspective of Vancouver Island. Does your film kind of do something similar? And, you know, what discoveries about the island stood out to you in, like, lifting that veil a bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I just think, like, when we talk about BC in general or Vancouver Island, it's exactly what you just said. Is like, in the commercials, it's always like surfing, Tofino, these happy couples, like, always like hiking, and like the orcas and the whales. And, you know, we have a cut part that we used to be in an old cut of the movie, is we created a fake commercial for tourism of Port Rupert. That was hilarious, but it just didn't fit narrative. Like, it just, like, it took the pacing off of so I had to take it out. But it's on the Instagram of City of Port Rupert, just the ending of it, actually, we did post. Yeah, go check out City of Port Rupert on Instagram. It's heating up today. You know, that stuff exists, and that's the truth, right? But then what we just talked about is, like, there's these clusters of missing people. There's, like, there clearly is a darker side to Vancouver Island and BC in general. You know, if you want to talk about more northern communities that I don't think we really talk about because it makes us uncomfortable. It's spooky, and, you know, so that, yeah, when you talk about the veil getting taken off, it's just like, you know, there must be a reason that Victoria's like the most haunted place, you know, city in Canada, that there's so many witches and, like, practicing mediums on Vancouver Island. There's something going on that I'm not making up for my movie, right? We're just picking up on it and using it for a narrative, but there's something going on out there. I think is just what's happening, and Reddit's talked about it. You know, we've posted a bit of the comments on our, but there's whole threads about everyone's like, there's a different feeling out here. There's a different feeling. Yeah.
Well, even when you say that, like, as we're speaking, I think recent Gabrielle Union film just finished wrapping in Victoria, which is about covens in New Orleans, but they chose Victoria to kind of represent that because there is something here. Did you know that Vancouver Island and Victoria was haunted before this, or was this something upon discovery?
Yeah, I knew it was haunted. My growing up, actually, I would read these. I don't know if you know about them. They're they're Haunted Canada, and it was an anthology series where every province had
I totally forgot about them.
And every province was a different color. They were so beautiful. And I bought the entire series. Well, my parents did. I think from, like, all the Scholastic fairs. Yeah. And I had every province. And my favorite province to read was BC because of Victoria. And when I would go to any of these cities, because my parents took me on a cross-Canada road trip with me and my sister. We went to Winnipeg, Victoria, and back one summer, then Winnipeg to Prince Edward Island and back another summer. And we went to every major city in Canada, and in every city I did the haunted ghost walking tours, because I would read those books in the car and then do the research as, like, a 7-year-old to be like, we're doing the haunted thing and I need to see this place. And so I was obsessed with it, and my dad would read me these stories and they scared the shit out of me, but I was so tantalized. So I think, like, back to the DNA of myself and, like, why I love horror or this, and I built this out probably because of those books and those ghost tours. So when I went to Victoria, I specifically remember doing the ghost tour in that city. Great ghost tour in Victoria, great ghost tour in what city am I? Kingston, Ontario is an incredibly haunted place too. Great ghost tour in Kingston, and Fort Henry out there. Anyways, all this being said, I knew about that. I was very aware of Victoria being a haunted place. And I had a haunted experience last time I stayed there with my sister, which was a crazy thing. There's that. Are you in Victoria? Okay. There's the hotel on the main drag. What's it called? It's very haunted.
Regency.
Is it the Regency? It's not the Fairmont one. It's like an older.
So I think it's on Government Street, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it's that a prostitute was murdered there.
Okay.
And she haunts the Regency Hotel.
Okay.
There's a few hotels.
I don't know if it's that one. There was but anyways, it's a lady that haunts it. So I remember talking to my sister and my brother-in-law, and we were all staying in the same room. And this was I don't know, right before COVID. I don't know. Anyways, we looked this up because I'm like, hey, guys, Victoria's the most haunted place. I wonder if our hotel is haunted. And then I looked it up and it said, yes, it is haunted. And my sister was like, oh my God, you chose a haunted hotel. I don't want to stay at the haunted hotel. I'm like, come on, whatever. It's not going to hurt anybody. And this is what happened. So again, I can't verify anything, but me and my sister both woke up. My brother-in-law slept through it. And I woke up to a loud knocking on our door at about 3 a.m. It was just past 3 a.m. Me and my sister both woke up, and I was in the opposite bed, and she's like, Markian? I'm like, yeah. She's like, did you just hear that knocking? And I'm like, yes, I did. And then it knocked again, and I was like, oh God. And she was like, I'm not getting up. You have to go up to see who it is. I'm like, gosh, I'm scared. And I went up. And I went up to the door, looked through the peephole, and there was nobody there. So again, could it have been some knock-knock ditch? For sure. Okay? For sure. But I don't know who's knocking at a door and playing knock-knock ditch in Victoria it was like a Monday night.
Yeah, there's too many old people, I think, to be doing that.
Yeah, and there's too many. And if somebody were knocking on the wrong door, they would have stayed. Why would you knock twice and then just walk away? You would wait until so there we go. I think I've had a haunted experience in Victoria myself is what I'm saying. Yeah.
And we're really for anyone with that has nostalgia for the 90s, we mentioned the Scholastic Book Fair and those haunted books. They're going to be going wild just as I am. And speaking of nostalgia, obviously in the film you reference Blair Witch Project a lot. Most people that love horror movies would know Blair Witch. It kind of ushered in a new era of filmmaking. Tell me about your connection to the Blair Witch and why that connection was important to make in the film too.
Yeah, I think for me, when you make a film like the one we did or any found footage, the inevitable thing that's going to happen is that you're going to get compared to the Blair Witch. It's been happening for 25 years since it came out. Every review you ever look at from found footage movies makes that comparison in the review. And that they always have to state, oh, well, it's not as good as the Blair Witch. It's happened to us. It's literally happened to us. And I knew that as a filmmaker going in, that was going to be the case. And so I didn't want to hide from it. I didn't want to pretend like the Blair Witch doesn't exist, especially in our universe, because it's supposed to be real. So instead, I went the opposite way, which found footage movies don't do. They try to pretend as if what they're doing is totally novel, which I've never said I'm doing here. So I wanted to embrace it. I wanted to make it part of the narrative in order to, I guess, pay homage to it a little bit, but at the same time, I think it just does a trick on the audience where we're being so transparent about it that it kind of hopefully tricks you a little bit as a viewer to be like, wait, they're talking about it. Because, I think there's this pretension where if you catch on to the movie, you're going to be like, oh, it's the Blair Witch. They're just doing the Blair Witch. It's like, yeah, I know. And we're going to have fun with it. And we're here to have fun with that format. And to kind of create a modern version of that movie is kind of like what I hope I've done and wanted to do from the start. But I think nostalgia, what you just said, if like the Blair Witch is part of that, nostalgia plays a huge part in this entire movie. Like when I watch true crime documentaries and there is like home video footage, which is a large part of our first 25 minutes of this movie, that's hugely nostalgic for me. All of the board games we talk about in this movie, hugely nostalgic. And it's supposed to me, transport the viewer to that time so that Matthew and Jordan feel like your brother, you know, like it's Tara's. You know, and I think there's more empathy when you watch home videos, because there is for me when I watch these things, because I remember those times in the 90s, and that's takes me again to a sense of warmth and comfort, which, you know, back then represents for Tara, right? So nostalgia, and hopefully I play against your nostalgic comfort as a filmmaker and lull you into this sense of security and familiarity with the Blair Witch home videos. And from there start going down the path of destruction. I think that's like a fun narrative thing to also have, just like from a filmmaking perspective to do. And so when I talked about authenticity with the camera, so all of the home video footage is either, it's two things. It's the actors' actual home videos. It's a lot of my actual home videos from the 90s personally. Or it's the actors' home videos that I had to source and get from them, and I had to take their tapes and get them digitally. And so it's either that, which I'd say it's about 50-50 of existing home footage from the 90s, or we shot that home video footage on a camera from 2000. So we were on the Palm Quarter. It's a Sony, I think, or Canon, shoot. But we're on the Palm Quarter, and it was important to me to find that camera from 2000 that the boys would have had, and shoot on it, which we did. So we found in Winnipeg, a friend of the cameraman's parents had their camera that we got shipped out to Vancouver. And it still worked, because we went through 4 cameras, and the problem with that technology is so many moving parts. None of them worked. So we went 1 didn't work, 2 didn't work, 3 didn't work. Finally found this camera that worked, and I had to then get the batteries sent in from China, order it from this battery depot in China, that they sent these batteries over because their battery would last about 5 seconds. It was totally cooked, and so we had to find new batteries, and then we would shoot this stuff on this Palm Quarter, and then at the end of the day send the tapes to a place here in Vancouver to get digitized and to be part of our dailies. So it was so much work, but it was all in the name of authenticity, because I didn't want to ever downgrade footage. That was a rule that I said, I can tell as a filmmaker when somebody's downgraded footage to make it look like VHS, you know, and I didn't want that. I was like, the authenticity has to be that's what they shot on, that's what we got to shoot on. Because if I'm a filmmaker in those first 20 minutes and I sniff out that you've downgraded footage, I'm out. It pisses me off so much. Just shoot on what you got to shoot on.
Yeah.
If you want to make it look like film, shoot on film. I can't stand that. The making it look like film, when I'm just like, well, then just shoot on film. It's expensive for sure, but if it's embracing the medium as a filmmaker, to me as a director, of not trying to replicate something. It's like you're given the technology, you're given the circumstances, you're given what you got, and you're going to work with that instead of trying to shift and make it something else, you know?
Totally. Yeah. And, you know, the more people that work with film, the cheaper it eventually will get.
Hey, can we go back to that, right?
Kind of going into, so obviously you were a kid, you know, you love these haunted things. You know, built your almost entire life on that. And now you're doing it as a career, but you're also mixing elements of true crime, and true crime is obviously like a massive, massive genre right now. It always has been, but there's a lot of it right now. You're obviously a fan of true crime stories, and how did that influence you doing this particular concept? Because the concept for whoever's listening, is a essentially fake documentary, but it's a film too.
Yeah. The genesis of this actually came from my love and watching of true crime documentaries. And you're so right that this genre is like ramping up to almost like an impossible pace. There's like a new one every week. It's like, I swear to God, every murder case will have had their own true crime thing. Like by 2030, we're going to have no cases left because Netflix and these guys are pumping them out every week. It's crazy, but I'm addicted to them and I love them, and I've tried to like psychoanalyze myself about why I like them, and I think this is it, which is when I watch these things, I say, oh, glad that isn't me.
Yeah.
There's like this sense of like, oof, my life is stressful, but it ain't that. That's crazy. I swear to God, that's why people watch it. It's like this masochistic, but like, and like horror, same thing of me, of like, you dream about what it's like to be chased by a monster, but you don't actually want to do it. I don't actually want to like, be caught in the sights of a slasher. But I'll watch it
really
because
don't.
it's like,
Really?
I really don't, but it's exciting. But it's like living a fantasy out, and that we all have dark fantasies. And I think there's like a scope of fantasy across the human condition, that in every part, right? So, and horror is part of it. And, anyways, that's my psychoanalyzing myself of like, why do I watch these things constantly? It's like torture. But it's such a popular thing. And when I was watching one years ago, the case was so unbelievable. I remember like being like, this is no way. Like, what are we talking about? I was like watching it being like, this is crazy. And I looked it up, and of course, inevitably, the interviewees, the interview subjects came out against the movie pretty publicly and said that they were edited out of context. Their words were minced to create sentences that they didn't say. And the documentarians basically were like, we're going to make this more exciting because it's actually not that exciting, but we want people to watch it and we want Netflix to put it on number one, right? So they took a lot of liberties, and they took like a conspiracy theory part, but then made it seem like that conspiracy theory wasn't a conspiracy theory. It's like everything added up. When in fact, it's like, no, they stretched the truth and went down the path of lies that some people or some witnesses said that weren't even true. It's just like, but if they said it, like, let's go down that path, right? And I felt like a little, like when I watched that, I was just like, oh man, like if I didn't look this up, I just would have thought that this was the case because it was presented in a true crime Netflix documentary format. It was well produced, seemed legit, high budget. Why would they lie to me? And I was lied to, and I was like, oh wow, okay, this can happen, and this is clearly happening in these documentaries, which a lot of them are because they're just entertainment value. And I was like, okay, this is really interesting because I could have been fed something that was made up from the start and wouldn't have known the difference. I really wouldn't have known the difference. And I said, that's what I want to make. I want to make up a case from scratch. And then to me, what's the most exciting ending? Well, it's like coming face to face with a monster or a killer or a confession. That is the most exciting thing that can happen. So let's just do that. Isn't that fun to watch? Because that's whenever I watch a true crime documentary, I hope that happens.
Yeah.
I really hope that happens. And it never does, right? It just usually is just like, well, we don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah, there's something about, I guess, like true crime where the ending is always, I guess, not satisfying in a sense. You don't get that catharsis of like, and he got what he deserved, and it was, an insidious monster the whole time. Whereas in your film, you can explore that because it's fiction, and you've chosen to do it in that way, and you can get the catharsis of almost like the good night's sleep, even though it's the ending scene is absolutely terrifying and my girlfriend couldn't sleep. But you can experience that catharsis in a sense.
Yeah. I just made a connection about my movie. I think that I'm going to make for the first time that maybe I'll use in other press stuff now because, you've seen the ending and the ending is up for discussion in our movie. And when you watch all these true crime documentaries, it's usually they present you with all the facts and then let you, the audience member, because they're usually unsolved or unresolved, make your own conclusion about who the killer was or who did it. You know, the newest one on Jean-Benet Ramsey. We still don't have the killer. They present you with all the facts, and you as the audience member, and you have these conversations with people. It's like, the brother did it, the dad did it. No, there was a killer that came in the basement. You know, and I think our movie does that same thing. Of like, it emulates that unsolved mystery kind of conversation at the end that maybe I didn't do on purpose, but maybe did. Of like, I just knew there wanted to be a conversation around it. And so that's why we built the ending like it is. And answers do want to come on that stuff. But we kind of, I guess, followed that true crime ending where you don't really know. You don't have those answers. You don't know because the cops don't know. The documentary filmmakers don't know. You don't know. But it brings up a fun discussion.
Why was shooting in Vancouver Island so important to you?
I advocate for Canadians and Canadian content and letting Canada play Canada. I think there's this weird thing in Hollywood or in the Canadian system itself of, oh, we can't play ourselves, that Canada doesn't sell. It doesn't, Americans won't know, they won't like that. There's this weird thing when you pitch, that we got people asking us to set it in Seattle instead, Washington. I'm like, what's the difference? Who's going to care? I don't understand this conversation and I don't agree with it. And they can tell you because of international sales or North American sales, and there's all these reasons. They've done studies, blah, 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 blah. I just don't buy into it, and I don't want to perpetuate it. And I want to advocate for Canadian stories, Canadian content, and especially in the genre space, because there's not a lot, to be honest. All the Canadian movies you see are either comedies from the CBC, or kind of very specific there's a very specific indie style out there right now where I can sniff out a Canadian indie from a mile away. I don't know. It's just like
tragically hip music,
Yeah, it's got this, and it's got a look to it, and it's like a little slow paced, and usually has these kind of characters that have that Canadian accent. You find one just somewhere up there. It's just like, I don't know. It's like. And so if I could introduce something that's like a horror movie that is uniquely Canadian, that maybe inspires other people to make genre films set in Canada, because we have such a diverse landscape here and people, that that's a difference maker to me. That was exciting. And so I always stuck by it, and I never wavered, and neither did Sean. And Sean supported me on this because it was important to me to set this in Canada. And, it's never stopped me from watching true crime documentaries that are from Europe, right? I've watched tons from the UK. I've watched tons from, other parts of the world, Italy. Why? It's never stopped me as a viewer from seeking this content out. So this like weird notion that, if it's set somewhere else, people don't want to watch it, I think is just false. People
are watching every movie with subtitles now, so even if it's not foreign, they're watching with subtitles.
And the other effect it hopefully has on audiences too is like, if you're American and you'd never heard of Vancouver Island, you've never heard of Port Rupert, that's great for me, because you have no bias coming into this, which and the less educated you are about this film coming into it, I think the more fun it is. So if the people are less educated about Canada in say in the States or elsewhere in the world, that's actually great for the movie. It helps with the believability and the myth that we're creating.
Totally. Yeah, and it's a great myth. It was a great movie too. Hunting Matthew Nichols. Where can people stream it, find it? Are you doing the festival circuit right now?
We are doing the festival circuit right now, so there is no place to stream it yet, but follow us at Hunting Matthew Nichols on Instagram. It's our most active account, and our website, huntingmatthewnichols.com, and we update with the next screenings, where they can be or where they will be. So we are planning to be on the festival circuit till about mid-next year, because we want to create kind of a word-of-mouth festival I call it like the mythos of this movie, where it's hard to get, and we're doing that on purpose, which makes a lot of people mad. But it'll eventually be available, and we'll update everybody when that happens, because there's a lot of, finding the right partner, distributor, and where this movie wants to land, I think is going to be very specific. So we're just working out the details of that right now. But in the meantime, having really a lot of fun with the festival circuit. About to play Whistler, which is our Canadian West Coast premiere. Very excited to share it with residents of BC finally. And follow us for all that information.
True. Yeah. And one more question, actually, to the mythos and, you setting up the website and that concept. How is that kind of setting up? Because you're maybe people who won't see this interview might see you in another interview, and you might come across differently. How is that process? Is that fun for you?
It's a lot of fun. It comes down to the marketing and like the difference maker with the movie, because when you're a small indie movie, you have to be different. You've got to raise above the noise a little bit. And I think our factor of blurring the lines of reality, fiction, we keep jumping back and forth. It's confusing as hell, but it's riveting. It's like, it gets the people going. So we're having a lot of fun with the marketing. We're having a lot of fun with seeing if we can, sell this thing as real. A lot of people get tricked, especially when they watch the movie. So we're having fun with that line blur. And, I encourage all audience members to add to the mythos if they'd like, if they want to play along, if they want to join in our fun, please do, and get involved and comment as if this thing is real and these boys are actually missing. A lot of people are, and we're just building this up. So it's kind of like we talk about, it's hashtag facts, not fear. When you talk about this movie and you see it and you've enjoyed it, talk about the facts of the case and the boys and everything. Don't talk about the fear of it. Don't talk about the scares. Save that experience for the next audience member to be just as surprised as you were, hopefully, or caught off guard, because that's where the fun of this movie really exists. And when we premiered in Newport Beach, we had 2 people walk out of in the middle of the ending, and they were so pissed off because they thought this was a documentary the whole time. And I loved it. I was just like, that's the perfect reaction that I was looking for. And about half the people in Newport had no idea what they were watching, and they got trapped in a horror movie when they didn't want to be there. And that's a lot of fun to me. And hopefully we can just spread the word and let other people have that experience together.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks so much for sitting down with me today. Much obliged, and check out the movie, everybody, whoever sees this.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Bye bye.